Hi, this is Ms. Wong, and we're taking notes on Unit 1, Systems and Scale, Organic and Inorganic Materials. This slideshow is going to tell us why ethanol behaves more like wood than water. Remember that our main question that we've been tackling this unit is what happens when ethanol burns? And part of our explanation is going to be enriched by understanding why ethanol behaves more like wood than water. Like before, if you haven't done so already, get a blank piece of paper and something to write with. Write the title, Organic and Inorganic Materials on the top, and today's date. Okay, so you don't have to take notes just yet, just listen and think. So first thing I want you to think about is, what do you think when you hear the word organic? And you might think to yourself that organic could mean something like natural or healthy. Maybe you think of organic as foods that are grown without pesticides. Maybe you're thinking about something else completely different, which is totally fine too. But one thing that we want to learn today is that in biology, organic does not mean any of these things. So we'll define organic in a minute. Let's get back to our question about why ethanol behaves more like wood than water. What we're talking about here in that is that if we look on a macroscopic scale, ethanol and wood both share the characteristic property that they're able to burn, but water doesn't. If we zoom out to the large scale doesn't really tell us anything about why these things, ethanol and wood, are more similar to each other. They look pretty different on the large scale. If we zoom into the microscopic scale, ethanol and water still look very similar to each other, and wood looks very different. So in order to answer the question, why does wood behave like ethanol and ethanol behave like wood, we have to zoom in even further to the atomic molecular scale and take a look at the individual molecules of water, ethanol, and wood. We're going to consider a particular molecule in wood called cellulose. And cellulose is, in fact, a very large molecule. We're only seeing a part of it right now. We've talked about cellulose before in class. Cellulose is like the crunchy part in celery, and it's also the part of wood that makes wood crackly and crunchy. So you can go ahead and make a chart in your notes of these materials: water, ethanol, and cellulose, found in wood and other plants, and then a column for atoms and a column for bonds. And go ahead and pause the video if you need to right now to make this chart. Okay, so the first thing to fill out in your chart is what atoms are found in these materials. So go ahead and write down the atoms that are found in water, ethanol, and cellulose. You can use the chemical formulas as a shortcut, or you can just look at the molecule pictures. Go ahead and pause if you need to write that into your chart right now. What are the atoms found in these materials? All right, so if we take a look at the atoms, you should have written down that water contains hydrogen and oxygen, ethanol contains carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, wood also contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But wait, this is actually not the key difference between ethanol and wood and water. Instead, let's now look at the bonds found in these materials. So go ahead and pause the video again to write down the bonds that are found in each of the molecules. Okay, so you should have written that water has the OH bond. You could have written it as HO bond as well, either one. And ethanol and wood both have OH bonds, CO bonds, CC bonds, and CH bonds. So why is this important? Because it turns out, we've learned before already, that CC and CH bonds means that molecules have available chemical energy. And we call CC and CH bonds high energy bonds. Go ahead and write that down in your notes if that would help you remember that CC and CH bonds have available chemical energy. In other words, they're high energy bonds. If those CC and CH bonds break down in a chemical reaction and those atoms reform into other bonds with other atoms, then that chemical potential energy gets released or transformed. So, what materials have available chemical energy? It turns out the materials that have CC and CH bonds have available chemical energy, ethanol and cellulose. Okay, let's pause here just to make a distinction that we've been talking about both atoms and bonds. So atoms are going to tell you about matter. So they're going to tell you about being rearranged in chemical reactions. And remember that evidence that matter moves and matter changes could be something like mass loss or gain, or things like BTB changing color, so that we know that one particular molecule could have been transformed into CO2. Bonds, on the other hand, tell us about energy. So when we're looking at atoms, we're thinking matter, and we're looking at bonds, we're thinking energy. Okay, so back to our question. Why is ethanol more like wood than water? Let's take a look at materials that burn and materials that don't burn. You can make a T-chart in your notes right now and a list of things that burn and a list of things that don't burn, so that you have that for reference. Okay, so what is it that makes these substances burn? Wood, butane, propane, ethanol, those are all substances that can react with oxygen gas in a combustion reaction, and they can light on fire. And all of those materials, when they light on fire, release carbon dioxide and water. So how are they different from water, salt, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen? Well, you may know where I'm going with this. Materials that burn have high energy bonds. So ethanol and wood both have CC and CH bonds, and so do all the other materials that can be in a combustion reaction with oxygen gas. So we're going to label those materials that have CC and CH bonds as organic. So organic means that molecules have CC and CH bonds. Whereas inorganic means that the molecules do not have CC and CH bonds. Go ahead and write that down in your notes as a distinction between organic and inorganic. So how can we identify organic substances? Well, there are two main things that we can use to identify organic substances. Thing number one, on a macroscopic scale, organic substances are found in food, fuels, or from the bodies of living things. So we can observe these things on a macroscopic scale. And then you wrote this down already, but on an atomic molecular scale, they contain CC or CH bonds. Looking forward into future units, we're actually going to be looking at animals and plants and the molecules that make up animals and plants. And so this is a preview of what we're going to be considering in future units. Take a look at what makes up the average human, the average apple, the average chicken. And you can see that we're made up of a combination of inorganic materials like water and minerals, as well as organic materials, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So we'll talk more about that in the future, but in the future we will have to distinguish between organic and inorganic materials and molecules. Okay, so now that we've been through this PowerPoint, go ahead and write down your ideas about these questions and be ready to discuss with the class. So first of all, do you think that humans are organic or inorganic, and why? Second question, do you think plastic is organic or inorganic, and why? Do you think a snail shell would be considered organic or inorganic, and why? And finally, why might it be important to know what molecules are organic or inorganic? So write your ideas for these 4 questions, be ready to discuss with your classmates in class, and thanks for listening.